Okay, we got the technology geared up. I didn't break the camera, so we'll go ahead. This is the Visible Learning package. It's actually the introduction to visible learning. And I have used this package, this particular package, these slides and everything already with some teachers. And so as I go through this, I'm going to give you some ideas of some of the pushback that I got from teachers and so on and so forth. Before we actually get started with the presentation, what I always like to do is take get a picture of the audience. So on a fist of 5, with 1 being I've heard the term visible learning, and 5 being I could be up there doing the presentation, and I'm suspecting I will get some 5s in this room. Where are you with the visible learning information? Fist of 5. Good, good. Because a lot of what this is, it is an introduction package, so it seems logical that since we're in year 3, that we should have some background in it. But that's okay. If we have new teachers or something like that, and sometimes, if you remember way back to the beginning, we had the visible learning information within each of the different packages. And it was kind of redundant. If you did different packages with the same teachers, they got the same information, which is the reason that we decided to do a separate module just on the visible learning as an introduction to the whole concept of visible learning and the Hattie research and all of that. So a lot of what you see today is information that had been incorporated in the individual modules at the very beginning. Okay? So you should have a folder of handouts, and in that folder you have a copy of the slides, and then you have some handout package, which has copies of various handouts that as we go through, I'll refer to those. Also on your table, and whoever is your resource manager should take charge of this envelope because you have some information in here which you can share as a table rather than printing it out for individual people. I just put it in an envelope, and that way the table shares it. You don't have to make all those copies for everybody. So that's what that stuff is. All right? So this is a short package. Being that it's an introduction, it's actually, I've done it in 2 hours with a group. You could stretch it out to a half a day, which would be 3 hours, but usually it's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours that you can use with this package. So it makes a good introduction to the work. So the first part, when you go into the package itself and see the slide presentation, these first sets of slides are going to be hidden because they are presenter information. And so, but I wanted to go through them because this is going to be important for you as presenters to have this background. These are some of the resources that have been called upon with this information. And then there is a pre-reading. Now, if you look in your packet, this is a copy of the pre-reading article. And you can send this out to the teachers ahead of time or whatever. We are actually going to use some quotes from that article in our opening activity. So we'll have some follow-up with that. But if a teacher didn't read the article, they can still participate in the activity as we go through. So this is the pre-reading. And then in your handout packet, the first thing on the packet, full page on your packet, is a yellow one, which is an idea that I stole from our friend Jen over here on the outline of the of the activity. She did that with metacognition. I thought, boy, that's a great idea. So I did that with the visible learning. So you have that with some estimated times, depending on where you want to spend time and how much activity you want the teachers to be involved in. But I can tell you it does fill 2 hours pretty good, especially when we get into the part about the where they take the little Hattie quiz, because a lot of teachers are really interested in that, and lots of discussion around that. So you can see the different sections as we go through on these on this training outline. Now, I also included a slide that tells you exactly what materials are contained in the package when you go onto the site and download the package. You will see that there are the outline of the training, which you have, the PowerPoint, and there is a presenter video summary, which we'll look at in just a little bit when we get to the practice section, where you show the video of the practice in practice. And because there's some decisions that you as a presenter have to make determined by the audience that you have. So there's a presenter video summary. There is also, the Missouri Teacher Standards are on there. And then all of the handouts are in the handout packet. There's a pre and post test. There's a pre-read article. And here's another thing. When you download the slides off of the internet, they will not have the animations in them that you're going to see on this presentation, because some people are not comfortable with all that animation stuff. And so if you want to add that, you're going to have to add that yourself, depending on what your comfort level is and what you like to do. Okay? So just remember that some of the animations will be the same, and I'll point those out. But for the most part, the animations that you see on the slides today will not be included when you download that PowerPoint. Now, if you want the animations, you just email me, and I'll send you the one with the animations, okay? But I did not include that in the package PowerPoint. This is where the actual presentation starts, with this slide right here. Those other slides that we saw beforehand are all hidden. They're just for your information. So, welcome. I'm Susie. And then, of course, if you were a group that didn't know each other or whatever, I would have you introduce yourselves to each other and give a little background and so on and so forth. But we are going to have an inclusion type of activity to help with that. All right? This is the activity. And on your handouts, you will see that you have a quote attached on a color strip of paper. Do you see that? And this activity is called Walkabout Talkabout. Now, the protocol for all of the activities are also in those handout materials, in that folder. So the actual protocol for Walkabout Talkabout is in there, so you can see those steps. But you're going to silently read the quote that you have. And where did these quotes come from? The pre-reading article, very good. And on a scale of 1 to 4, how would you rate your feelings regarding this quote? With a 1 being you strongly disagree, and a 4 being you strongly agree. And here's the key to this. You choose 1 to 2 keywords or concepts in the quote, and all of them have to do with student learning. And then when I give you the cue, what I want you to do is stand up and find somebody with a different color, different quote than you have, and you can tell because they're color coded. And you are going to introduce yourselves, and you're going to share your quotes, and then you're going to share those 1 or 2 key concepts and that from your quote. Are you with me? And then I'll give you another cue. You'll have about a minute to do that, and then when I give you another cue, you're going to move to another person that has a different colored quote. And so by the time we go through this, within 4 or 5 minutes, depending on how, this is one of those areas where you can make it longer, where you can make it shorter, depending on the size of your group. If you have a big group, you're going to take more time with this. If you have a smaller group, you're not going to take as much. That make sense? All right, so I'm going to give you a minute first to just read the quote and come up with those key concepts. All right, I want everybody to stand up. And when I say go, you find somebody not at your table that has a different color quote, and you start sharing. Ready? Go.
I really like mine. I did not like mine. So this has been teaching at the what is appropriate to challenge. Teaching at the seek to ascertain whether and what your
All right, thank you, partner. And switch, different color.
We didn't use it.
And you're new to the center. Oh, very good. I'm at Kansas City. Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing.
I don't like it.
I like my quote. The key issue is that children may think differently from adults/teachers, and which means that attention needs to be given to how.
All right, thank you, partner. And switch again to a different color quote. Remember, we're not repeating colors. Switch one more time to a different color. Now you have to start hunting. Okay, thank you, partner, again, and return to your seat.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, there's a couple of purposes behind this activity. Number one, it's a mindset. We're going to be talking about mindset later on in the presentation. And so we have to get a mindset on what? What is a mindset on that these folks and talking about them established? What are we thinking about? Student learning. Yeah, student learning. So now we're thinking about student learning. And the second purpose is that if you have people that did not read the pre-reading, they get an introduction to basically what was in that pre-reading. And if you have people that did read it, they put their background knowledge from reading it into their discussion as they're discussing their quote. So it works for either group of people on that pre-reading, because some people will read it and some people won't. And this is a way to get that, still get that information out there and that mindset out there, even though not everybody did their homework. Right? Because everybody's still held accountable for picking and choosing those key ideas and concepts in those quotes. And you can actually use this for about anything with a pre-reading exercise or some kind of exercise, different content, to get people thinking about what is the primary concept that we want to discuss today. And that's student learning and the impact on student learning. All right, so that's the purpose of that opening walkabout, talk about activity. Of course, you always want to remind people of what the norms are. And so you can go over those depending on the group. Being an introductory package, you will probably have a new group that you may not have worked with before. And so it's important to make sure that they are following these norms and they are aware of the professional behavior that is the expectation for the presentation. And then the learning objectives, there's a few of these. It's to introduce the Hattie research. It is also to gain an awareness of the habits of mind and beliefs. And this is where that mindset piece. A lot of the time, when we talk Hattie, we talk about the practices, but we fail to mention the mindset piece, which comes before the practices. It's kind of a foundation for the practices. The practices will not be successful unless the person using those practices has the mindset. So that's why it starts out and puts a focus on those mindsets as we go through. And if you can draw parallels to this, because if you're familiar with the teacher evaluation system, and most of the teachers that you talk to will be familiar with that, one of the key first parts of that teacher evaluation training for the principals has to do with growth and fixed mindset. So it's really an important piece to get in there to get people, make people aware of how you think matters in what you do. Right? So just giving them the practices without talking about mindsets leaves a piece out. That's why the mindsets are included in this package. And then the effect size, we're going to talk about effect size for the various things. And then the behaviors and practices, what behaviors and practices do have significant impact. And then finally, to look at the effect size of various practices that may be taking place in their classrooms. Okay? Essential questions, of course, is how can impact be measured, and what in practices and behaviors have an impact, but we really want to talk about this, which is why is it important to track and monitor these? Because when we're talking about coaching and all of this other stuff and being aware, we want to make sure that they understand that tracking and monitoring this is an important piece. Okay.
I just had a question on the learning objectives. Number 3 and number 5 are exactly the same, aren't they? If you go back a slide.
Yes, they are.
Is
Thank
there
you.
a reason for that?
No.
Okay, I just thought.
Double vision. Double vision is what it is, so we will change that. Well, let's see, were anybody in here in the vetting group? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, the session at a glance are the different stages, and you can see setting the stage, which is what we've just done, getting a mindset, talking about the norms, and so on. Then we're going to talk about the key concepts and principles in the next piece. The piece that follows that is maximizing the effect size activity, and then the practice videos, and then finally a tool for self-assessment on any or all of the practices. And then, because I talked about measuring the impact, so I'm going to give you a tool that teachers can use to help measure that impact for their implementation of these different practices, right? So that's where we're going. The Missouri Teacher Standards, now there are several slides that have the Missouri Teacher Standards on here. What I always like to do when I talk about the Missouri Teacher Standards is to first poll the group to see which standards and indicators they are working on within their district or within their building, because then that helps me to focus and pinpoint some practices that are connected to the specific indicators that they are supposed to be working on their individual professional development plans and that type of thing. So it really helps, and it also provides that relevance for teachers. Why am I sitting here? If I know what they're working on, then I can make this fit into what they're doing. And their ears seem to perk up a little bit when they know it's something that they can do to meet those criteria for those indicators that they go through the evaluation system. Right? So you have 2, 5, 7, and I would venture to guess that any group that you are working with will have one or more of these standards, an indicator from one or more of these standards that they are working on in their evaluation system. Okay? And then standard A professionalism. Now you remember when we first started that graphic that we had that had the little pillars with all the things, and you had best practices? Well, I kind of updated with Stephen talking about systems and making the systems approach. What I have is a graphic that shows the Missouri educational system as a system. And so it is a system that is focused on student growth and is measured how and monitored how? Through MSEP 5. Now, in your folders, you have a laminated copy of this graphic that you can look at in the table. Yeah, in the envelope. In the envelope. You will see a laminated copy of this graphic, so you can see. So you have student learning, which is the focus, of course. It is monitored through MSEP 5. But in the middle of that, you have all of these things that are working together. And when you're working on one, you're working on all of them. This is why I tie the Hattie work, which is this right here, the instructional practice work, to the learning standards or the teacher standards that they're working on. Of course, it is also tied to the learning standards, the practices, because what are you implementing with these practices? You're implementing the Missouri Learning Standards. And it is also tied to the Missouri Assessment Program, because the success that you have with these practices is going to increase your student success on the Missouri Assessment Program. Now, I originally had this as an optional slide, And the vetting group seemed to think that everybody should have this idea. So I have a poster of it, and then I made a laminated copy for the table. Because teachers really like it when they see that when they're working on one thing, they're actually working on the whole thing. They're not individual silos. It's really important with visible learning, because when we look at those individual practices that Hattie talks about, they really don't stand alone. They're all integrated in the system of instruction. And you really can't talk about one without talking about the other. That's what a system is all about. And this is where the practices fit into the Missouri educational system. It's an interdependent system. It doesn't help to fix just one, because when you do something in one, it affects the others. Right? So you have to look at it as a system. So, what are the key concepts and principles? Before I move on, questions about the systems or about the mindset activity or any of that other stuff that we just talked about? Yes?
I just want to comment that I think this is a really good handout to share with participants, because we so often run into the obstacle of teachers within the schools saying, but we are now, we can't focus on CW practices because we're working on, our evaluations or da-da-da-da. And this way, they really do see how it's all interconnected.
And if you have that feedback, feedback from teachers, and they have these other things that they're working on, you can show them that and say, where do these other things fit in? Where do they fit into this system of student learning? We know what the focus is, we know what the measure is. Everything we do should fit into this system someplace. Should be connected, interconnected, or interdependent on the other. And so when teachers are working on Hattie practices, that's why I pull in the evaluation, because that's important to them. If they know that by working on this, they're actually working on this too, then they are much more interested in working on this. And the results that they see are going to be the increases in student learning, and that because it's all a balanced system. When you work on one, it all just goes through the, it's kind of a ripple effect. And on the poster that you have there, you can see that it has student. You see that up on top, which I don't have in this one. It says focused on student growth, and then monitored through IMSEP, which is what that first piece was. So this graphic itself, this size, is also included in the materials that are on the internet, that are on the website. So you can get that. And you can use it all you want, because I'm the one that came up with it. So it actually belongs to CW, because I did the CW time. So there you go. Right? So, any other questions, comments? I'm glad to hear that, because they said that in the vetting, and I'm glad to hear that you support that as we go through. Sometimes this is a piece that teachers miss. They just see it as something else. All right? Okay, what are the key things? Now, here's another thing that I like to do. Here is, you always, when we're doing something, I'm going to shut that down so that you're listening to me instead of figuring that out. When we give the definition of something, we give a definition, and that's it. So I try to do that a little differently. Sometimes I have them come up with their own definitions and so on and so forth. But this is a way to get them thinking about the definition, to stick it in their minds as to what visible learning is. So what I have given them is a fill in the blank. Now I've given you the 6 words that go into this definition. All you have to figure out is where in this definition do these words go. These are the words, you're going to use them all. There's 6 words, 6 blanks. So take a minute and see if you can figure out where all of those words go. Okay, got it figured out? When you do this with a group of teachers, you have quite the discussion at the table. You guys are all focused on doing it yourselves. But you have quite a discussion at the tables. I've done this with teachers. But during that discussion, they're talking about the definition. They're repeating it. How many times in your head, whether you did it alone or whether you did it with somebody else, did you repeat that sentence with the different words? And so it really makes it stick. Let's see if you got it right. This animation is one of those that is on the slides. All right, what's number 1? Student. What's number 2? Learning. Okay. Number 3? You had the 6 words and there's just 6 blanks. Attributes. Okay, see? So now you're all rereading it to make sure it makes sense, all right? And see if I'm right, because I already made one mistake. She can make another one. Number 4. Knowing. And number 5. Knowing and understanding. And number 6. There's just one left, guys. And doing. You see, we're used to knowing and doing, aren't we? So it seems automatic. Yes?
Just real quick, maybe it's just this slide, but the word about is covered, just a little.
Okay, that's the, oh, that's just on that slide, it's not up there.
In the previous, I believe.
the previous
With
one.
the word choices on the bottom. I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Because I would go, and I would.
Go about, okay.
About, yeah.
All right. Okay. Questions about that fill-in-the-blank activity? Can you see where that might fit in with about anything that you give a definition for? Because if I just read the definition to you, you don't think about it. And if you do it this way, I make you work for it. And with that work, with that cognitive effort, comes a deeper understanding, or at least a better remembrance of what we're talking about as we go through. So those 6 words will be stuck in your head as we work through the rest of this activity. So let's look at John Hattie. He is from Australia and New Zealand, and he's done a lot of stuff. But the biggest thing is this work that he did for visible learning. This is what put him on the map. Stephen called, wrote the Bible, visible learning. And this is one point that I had some pushback with some teachers on. We have to understand what a meta-analysis is. And how many of you remember the Marzano work? It was a meta-analysis of research studies, correct? 800 research studies came up with 9 strategies that were highly effective. Marzano did not do the research himself. He just took all the research and put it together and then figured, see what came to the top. Well, that's exactly what Hattie has done. He's taken all the research, except on a much larger scale than what Marzano did. He took 800 or so of those he did a meta-analysis of meta-analyses, which is a much larger scale. He did not do the actual research himself. All he did was put it together, because I had teachers saying, well, just what kind of student body did he work with? Where were these kids? Did they live in the city? Did they live, and so I had to explain he did not do the research himself. If you look in the back of his book, the back of the first book, I think some of the others too, all of the research studies that he used are in here. And if you want that information, you can look at the individual studies to see where they were done. But it is really a very broad range of students as well as locations and everything. So it's pretty well across the board. And Another one said they didn't like the glass research. Well, Glass was the one that came up with the idea of meta-analysis originally. And so meta-analysis has to do with Glass. The research is done by other people put together by Hattie. He did not do the research himself. Okay? That was a sticking point with some of the teachers. I think maybe it was, because it was like 4 o'clock on the Friday afternoon, before vacation or something like that. That was a problem. But it's important that they understand what a meta-analysis is. And that he included 800 plus meta-analyses in his one big, gigantic meta-analysis, which included 50,000 plus studies, individual studies, and more than 2 million students. Huge, huge grouping of information. But he did not do the research himself. He just put it together. So we start out first with the categories. He took all of these practices that he looked at, about 150 of them, and he categorized them into different areas of influence. Those practices that were teacher-focused, curricula, those that had to do with the curriculum and so on. So he had the different categories. And it's important to point out that of all of this, the most influential, something that we've always known, the most influential was the teacher items. And when you're talking to a room full of teachers, you can show them that. What you do in the classroom counts most. So I want you to listen to Hattie for what he says specifically about teacher impact. Now, in your folder, you have a copy of what Hattie is saying, right here. And you'll notice, for those of you that are literacy savvy, that this is set up like a close reading. And so depending on what your group is, you may talk to them about writing their ideas or their questions or whatever out here in this right-hand column. The reason I gave this transcript out is because being Australian, sometimes it's hard to understand. And so this helps. You hear it and you can read what he's saying. So I'm going to let you listen to John Hattie. Pay close attention to the words teacher impact.
As president of VASP, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce this series of videos where our members have presented what they believe is happening in their schools in a really positive sort of way and the sorts of things that are making a difference in government school education. I really recommend that you view these, possibly use these with your staff to talk about what you're doing in your schools and how you're going to go about continuing to improve what is happening in your school.
Hi, I'm John Hattie. I'm the Director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute, University of Melbourne, and I have a fascination with what success looks like. And certainly in my career there are many academics who love to study failure. I'm much more interested in the opposite. And one of the beauties of being interested in success is there's plenty of it out there. And certainly in terms of what great schools look like, feel like, is that they are inviting places for kids to learn. Kids actually want to be there. And that notion of having schools, particularly high schools, where kids want to be there and they enjoy the engagement of learning, that is really what matters. Certainly in primary schools, kids make the decision about staying in a single school around the age of 10, 11, 12, so it's pretty important then too that it is a great place to learn. One of the things that make it a great place to learn, besides safety and sense of fairness, is that students continually get information about their progress. Like all of us, no matter who we are, what business or work we're in, like to know we're having an impact. So do kids. and so do teachers. And teachers who know what their impact is are the ones that have the greatest dividends for the kids. And certainly all my research work shows that it's when teachers know who they're having an impact with, what they're having an impact about, and what that magnitude of that impact is, are the ones that tend to be the most successful, the most passionate, and have the biggest difference on kids' lives. And so I deliberately haven't mentioned things like test scores and scores on standardised systems, whatever. Not that they're unimportant, but they don't rank that highly. For many of our kids, going to school isn't just about getting high scores in reading and number, even though they can be incredibly powerful precursors to develop things. If a kid is going to go on and be a barista or a water polo coach, there are things about how to think, how to be entrepreneurial, how to have confidence, respect for self, respect for others, that are going to make a dramatic difference. Schools are responsible for the development of character, as well as the development of proficiency in many areas. If I could think of one thing that I would want schools to worry about my own kids going through that system, is that they would teach them that effort is what makes the difference. They teach them about how to concentrate, how to be persistent, what to do when you don't know what to do. Now, those things are really important, but they do have to be anchored in some subject matter. And there are lots of different subject matters that are critical to me for kids who go through schools. There are multiple ways of being excellent in the school. When it comes down to it, the biggest power of school is the impact of the teachers. And so I have a lot of faith, I have a lot of evidence, I have a lot of authority that I would like to put on the notion that excellent teachers are what drive our system. When they're led by excellent leaders, you've got a very powerful combination. So when it comes down to it, good schools, great places for kids who want to be there, showing evidence that they are having an impact on the growth of those kids, having a moral purpose about the impact on those students' characters, and collaboratively working together in and across our school systems to show our population that we do a pretty stunning job. One of the things I've been doing over the last decade or so is trying to understand what truly makes the difference to kids learning. And I certainly found out that on a scale I use, that anything above, my scale above 0.4 is above average. One of the nice things when I analyse Victorian schools data is around about 82 to 84% of teachers out there are having that greater than the worldwide average. I also note that Australia ranks 9th in terms of its status in the PISA ranks. That's a pretty impressive place to be. It's a hell of a lot better than being 49th. And if you look at companies in Australia, such as on the Fortune 500, our top company is only 108th. We're 9th in the world. Something must be going right. There must be something pretty powerful out there in terms of the quality of our schools and of our teachers. One of the things I am not saying is that teachers don't make the difference. It is some teachers who think in particular ways that make the difference. And one of the pleasing things about being in Australia is there's plenty of us, and I think as a system we need to recognise it and control the narrative about great teachers make great schools, and great leaders make great teachers, who then make great schools.
Did the transcript help? Yeah. Sometimes he's kind of hard to understand, and so having a hearing impairment myself, it's important to me to watch people talk. And that's as long as they talk and form their sounds the same way I do, or that I'm used to. And it was very hard when I even saw him in person for me to follow along with exactly what he said, so I thought.
The argument that I deal with is the question of how do we know in our business.
We don't want to listen to him anymore. But anyway, it's important, and it was important to me, and certainly it would be important to some of the people in the room if you wanted to make sure that they got the key ideas and concepts. Plus, they can also write notes as they're going along. Of course, you would follow this up with a discussion about teacher impact and what he said about impact, because that was the question going into this video. But the transcript, part of the material, so it's there for you to use or not to use, however you choose to do so. Okay. All right, now we get into the mind frames. And what I have is an article which is Know Thy Impact teaching, learning, and leading. And this is a very short jigsaw. So if you want to count off in 4s, and then the number 1s come up and get a packet. Because what I did was take the article and divide it into the 1, 2, 3, 4 pages, so that everybody doesn't have the whole article. They just have the beginning and then whatever their assignment is on the jigsaw. Make sense? All right, so number 1s come up and get a packet for all the 4 numbers. And if you're 1, 2, 3, 4 all together, then you can I just want to give you a taste. We probably won't take the whole time to do the whole thing. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. Okay? So I have the packets already, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can distribute them when you get back to the table. And notice that I also included a note-taking page for you. And I do this with all my jigsaws because the note-taking, when you're working on your part, you're taking notes here, right? And then you're going to go back to, you know how jigsaw works. Then all the 1s get together and then all the 2s get together and so you write your notes here on whatever part it is that you're doing. Then when you go back and share, you have a place to write the notes on the other part as you're listening to the people report out. That makes sense? So you have it all right here in one piece instead of having just a bunch of note pages for each one. So it really helps to organize. One of the key things that I tell teachers to do are those thought organizers. Always provide thought organizers for students. And so this is along the lines of a thought organizer. It keeps it all together and you have it right there and you don't have to worry about it. So I do this whenever I do a jigsaw. I always have something like this where they can write their notes here, then they take notes that from the other sections right on the same page. And it works really well. Because as I tell teachers, if I have this, you were my class. Okay. If you were my class, my follow-up would be to have some type of writing assignment or something here to follow this up, and they would have all the information they needed in one place, right here, all organized according to the same outline. Make sense? So teachers really like that idea, and so I use it with my jigsaw. Right? Now, if you just kind of glance through the mindset piece, like I say, we're not going to take the time to do the whole thing. The whole article, a copy of the whole article is in your envelope, but it is also on the website so that you can get it. And I just divided it up because it makes it a whole lot simpler. People aren't flipping through the whole thing to find out what pages they're supposed to read. And so everybody gets to read the first part, and then they get to read their individual line frame. And it seems to work really well that way. When you have one article divided into 4 parts. So the page numbers are here. They don't really have to pay too much attention. If you've got it divided like this, they know exactly what they're reading and taking notes. Questions about this activity? Questions or comments about this jigsaw activity? Of course, the second part is when they return to their home groups and they share out. They still have a place to write notes according to the same organizational pattern, and which leads them right into something else. If this was the class and I was using it for something, for a piece of content. Yeah.
When to access these materials in print, is there a way where it's not so dark?
That's a problem with the copies. I did not redo the whole article to do that. So, because there are some dark pieces.
What we would have that would be provided for us as the original
The original you can read that from. So when you download the original, you'll be able to read it, depending on your copier or printer or however. It's, pardon me? For activities, not to distribute. If you're using it as an activity, as pieces for an activity, and that's another reason to kind of divide it up, because that makes sense. Because then it is really activity focused rather than just distributing the article. But the original copy is the one that you can download. And if you want to print it out in color, then you don't have a problem with that. Other questions or comments? If you look on the slides, on the bottom of these slides in the presenter notes, it'll have the link actually to the article on the internet. So if you want them to read the whole article, you can. That's why I didn't give you a copy of the whole article, other than that one in the envelope. But if they want to read the whole article, they can go to that link and get the article. Okay? So, we know it's important, so now how do we get the most out of it? Of course, that's what the learning is all about, visible learning is all about. I always show all 3 books, and I ask for the research junkies in the room to raise their hands. Research junkies, raise your hand. Okay? Because this is your book. This is a research junkie book. Regular people, raise your hands. Okay. This is a regular people book. All right? This is a regular people book. And I want to really know more about that, how that works. This is your book. So I always tell them the difference between the 3 books, because it's important for them to know that. They don't spend money on something that they're not going to like. The effect size. It's hard for them to understand what effect size exactly is. They think it's something that Hattie just pulled out of his hat. Hattie pulled out of his hat. But it's not. He had to find a ruler to measure all these studies. You know, all these 50,000 individual studies. Had to have a ruler where he could compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. And so what he used for his ruler, you know, we have all kinds of rulers. We have metric rulers, we have inch and feet, we have all kinds of different rulers. And so and each one of these studies used a different ruler. So you had 50,000 different rulers that these researchers were using. So how do you put those all together? You have to come up with a common ruler that you can correlate their findings to this common denominator, so to speak. And that was effect size. And effect size is actually based on standard deviation, which every research study has a correlation to standard deviation. Research junkies know what I'm talking about. Other people are going to sleep right now. But it has to do with standard deviation. One standard deviation, you can see, typically represents 2 years' growth in 1 year's time. So a 1 all by itself, for effect size, would be 2 years' worth of growth. It's 1 year's worth of time. That's what standard deviation is. Okay? So it's not something he just made up. But he did come up with this barometer of influence that is based on effect size. And the premise was that just about everything works to some extent. You know, even a kid in a classroom with a really bad teacher will learn something along the way. All right? And so, and he put him on this barometer of effect size. And what he came up with was 0.4 as the hinge point. Because 0.4 he equated to basically 1 year's worth of growth in 1 year's time, which is probably the minimum of what we want, right? The minimum of what we hope for is 1 year's worth of growth in 1 year's time. And so that's the hinge point. And what he says is we have just so much time with those kids in the classroom. So what we need to do is be spending our time over here in 0.4 and above, rather than 0.4, below 0.4. Because this is the minimum that we want. And so that's how you read the effect size. Anything from 0.4 and above is in this desired range. 0.4 and below, we really want to look at closely at what we're doing. So how do we do this? And Jenna, if you would pass these out, and we're not going to do this. How many of you have done this exercise before, high, medium, and low? Teachers love this. And this will take the bulk of the time, but I put timers on it so that it won't take a whole, too much time. So you can work, I tell them to work alone or with a partner or a small group, however they want to. And they are going to read the practice and then decide whether it has high impact, medium impact, or low impact on student learning. Okay? And I'm going to give them, and they want to know, well, what are the numbers that go with high, medium, low? So here's the numbers that go with high, medium, and low. Even though there's no numbers on here, just high, medium, and low, they want to know what the numbers are. So here's the numbers that go with that. And then I also have them do this. They look at this list and I say, okay, how do you think you're going to do? Fist of 5. Make a prediction of what you're going to score on this quiz. If you were doing this, what would you think you would score? And I want you to write that prediction up at the top of your page. Write that prediction up at the top of your page. How do you think you're going to do? You can do it percent, you can do it so many out of so many, however you want to do. All right? And then I take a round, I take a feel for the room again with a fist of 5, according to this. And everybody holds up what they think they're going to do. What do you think you're going to do? I should see 5s. Everybody hold up the whole hand. That's it. No! The whole hand. So this is predictions. All right? And then this particular animation is in there. When you get to this slide, all you have to do is click on this arrow, and it will slowly fade away as the time passes. It's a timer. All right? All right? Can you do this in 5 minutes? Try it and see. Since you all made predictions of 5, see what you come up with. I probably won't give you the whole 5 minutes, but try it. See the 5 is fading away. Fade down to this. How are we doing? We've got another minute or so. Because I can speed up time. Okay, when this timer runs out, this is what happens. Time's up. And the next few slides, when I first used this exercise, and I used it a lot, and I would have the key, and I would just read it to people, and they were trying to write everything down, and I'd have to repeat myself and repeat myself. So I just put the slides in here that have all the answers up there for this particular. How many of you, by the way, on feedback have heard that it went up from 0.7 to 1 point something? Hadding didn't change his mind. What happened was Cambridge, and you might look this up. Cambridge put assessment-capable learners and feedback together, and which they actually go together, and came up with a 1.1 something for that. So anyway, that's where that came from. But let's look at this. So this is what the slides look like. Then as you click, it shows all of the answers. Now the important thing about this, I'll do that so you can look. The important thing about teachers to understand with this, and that's why you need to have the books handy, is that you have to understand how Hattie defines each of these things. Because they will have that discussion, you will hear questions about this, that, and the other thing. And so it's important to read the book, to have the book so that they can see how Hattie defines. And it's important for you as a presenter to already know how Hattie defines some of these things. Because they're going to ask. And what I have is a shortcut that has some of these things and the effect size and the definitions of each one of these strategies on this. Yeah. And so that is included, thank you, Gina. That is included in the materials. So here's the next page. This saves me a lot of time with repeating and everything else, because they have it right here, they can copy it while I'm talking and defining things, they're copying. All right? Because they all copy this down to get this going. Then here's the next one. All of them are up there. So you have all of the answers. Everybody can see them and go from there. You can see where it's ranked out of the 150 and all of that. So it gives them all that information. And this is the last one. All right? So it makes it a whole lot easier to facilitate that activity as you go through. Okay. And of course, when we finish, and like I said, we have the discussion about what all these things mean, and first one thing and another, then I have them grade their papers and compare it to the predictions. And how did they do? So they have that discussion, and then finally they revisit their prediction, but then they have the reflection on what surprised you and so on and so forth. See that? I forgot, this is the three main messages from Hattie. I forgot to talk about, on the mind frames, we talked about the jigsaw, but you saw in your folder, you had I'm sorry, I'm going to go back just a minute. You have a reflection sheet for activity for the mind frames. Sometimes I use this instead of or with the other. This is interesting because the teachers then can visit with each other or by themselves independently, whichever they choose, and decide where on the continuum from 1 through 4 do their beliefs fall in relation to each one of these mindsets or mind frames. See that? But I go one step further with this reflection sheet. They have to put the evidence. It's not enough, because this is perceptual. So I ask them for the evidence that shows, that proves or disproves whether they're aligned with this mind frame. And when I have a shorter time, I have them, I give this to them anyway. They take it back and they do it on their own time where they can look and kind of see and think about it. So this is a reflection sheet on the mind frames before we get into the practices themselves. All right? So questions on that section? This section goes pretty quick. Implementation. Questions or comments on those activities? The implementation. Here's the problem. Now in your folders you have that presenter video summary, because when we talk about any of the practices that we train on, we're talking about visible learning. So my suggestion is that you pick a video that is aligned with a practice that they're going to work on for this. And so I found several different videos on several different levels and several different practices. And you as a presenter make the choice as to which one am I going to show. And so there is a slide for each one of those videos that are on that. Did you find that video? Is presenter video summary? Okay. There is a slide for each one of these videos that has the link to that video. Now, of particular interest, and we're not going to watch it right now, is this one on, if you're working with assessment-capable learners, this one on student-led assessment in a high school guitar classroom, or guitar. And what you have is a handout that goes with that video, because I thought this was a really good video where this teacher is talking about how he had these students actually assessing themselves. What he was doing was assessment-capable learners. He didn't know that's what he was doing, but that's what he was doing. And he talks about the whole process. So you can see that in the video he describes his school and his students, and then how he went through the rubric that he had, that he used, and then how he went through and what the results were on the students, the impact on the students when he followed this type of a protocol, this student self-regulation type of a thing. And it was really a powerful video that I just came across, because it's not listed for under visible learning. When you Google or search or anything there, it's not listed. On the back, I have the questions to consider. High school non-core is something that we don't often address. And here's a video that addresses assessment-capable learners in a high school music classroom. And so I thought it was an important one to include, especially if you had those types of teachers in your audience. There's lots of elementary and all of that. So I have feedback and all kinds of stuff, videos that you can choose from, or you may choose a video that you're going to use in your training. And then repeat it when you do the training. because repetition doesn't hurt when it comes to that, because they're looking at through a different lens each time. So this one is just, you might, if you get a chance, just look at this video and watch this. He's actually giving a presentation to a graduate class about what he did, about his approach. And so he's really reflecting on it and talks about the impact on the kids, so on and so forth. Good video, good resource. Here's one on metacognition that I found, and for grade 3, all grade levels and so on, first grade, I have everything on here, all right? So I couldn't really give you one video to show, because it will depend on who you're working with and what their focus is going to be. And so if you don't know what their focus is going to be or anything, remember that first time when I said you find out what they're working on for evaluation? If you have this list of videos, you can pick any one of those videos that would kind of coincide with what they were doing for their evaluation indicators and go from there, which then again makes it more real and relevant for them. There's not a practice profile for visible learning in its entirety, because what are the practice profiles? They're the individual practice profiles that go with each of the individual practices. It's really hard. I came up with a practice profile based on a document that you have in your folder, but it was really cumbersome and just wasn't a good fit. And so when I vetted it, I had questions. And when I vetted it, they said it really doesn't, practice profile really doesn't apply to visible learning as a whole. So there is no practice profile. There is a fidelity checklist that goes with it, and that's in there. What you have in your folder is the John Hattie's checklist for visible learning inside, which is a self-assessment tool that teachers can use that go through the practices in general. And so remember at the beginning I said I would give you a tool? Here's the tool that you can use to self-assess and see where you're going, what the focus needs to be, and so you have the teacher work through this. You can see the different sections that go with this, and then the behavior descriptors that go with each of those sections. So why reinvent the wheel? John Hattie already did it. So this is his visible learning checklist that is out there for teachers to use. And then, of course, a final reflection. Now, there's not much me giving information to the group. I give a little bit of information, and then they do something with it, and they reflect on it, and that type of thing. Because what they have to, I have given them an awareness of it, but what they have to do is figure out how does this fit in with what I'm doing. And by going through those activities, whether it be the effect size, be it the mind frames, or whatever, they are always making that connection to how does this fit in with what I'm doing in my classroom. So you have the final reflection, but you also have the goals and the action plan and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a very long module, but it has a lot of stuff and lots of time for teachers to interact, to reflect, and think about what it is that they're doing. The longest part of this is that effect size quiz. Because when I walk them through the answers, when they're correcting and walking them through the answers, that's where we have the discussion about why is this impactful? Why is it a 1.4 instead of a negative 0.13? And how many of these things are you doing in your classroom? And of the ones that you recognize that you're doing in your classroom, what is the impact that it's having? What's the effect size for that activity or that practice? And how can we change those practices and get over from this side of the barometer to this side of the barometer with the time that we have? Not work harder, work smarter in terms of practices that go. Right? With me? Questions, comments? That's the package. And all of the stuff, like I say, everything that you saw today is available in the package materials. And most of the animations, all the ones that are important, are also in the slides. And I will have them change the slides when I make those corrections that we saw on there. Anything else that needs to be changed or tweaked or anything like that? Thank you very much. And